The Space Boy back at it again, dudes. We've got Supercross 5 versus Supercross 3. So let's just keep it real right now. This is the real comparison. When you talk about any of these official Monster Energy Supercross games, let me just break it down for you real quick, okay? Supercross 5 is just a better 4. Supercross 2 is just a better 1. And Supercross 3 is just a better 2. So you can see where the comparison sort of comes from here. We basically have a old school milestone style ground physics system type feel more so in Supercross 3, and then Supercross 5 is kind of that more updated, looser, leaning forward and backwards. Some people think it's a little more floaty, physics-esque, but that's kind of your comparison. You know, 4 and 5 are pretty much the same thing, except 5's a little bit better. And 3 is, I mean, I guess you could say 3 is kind of almost like a hybrid between the old school milestone feel and the new school shit. You know, it's almost like a hybrid because this was the first game they added where you could turn both your thumbsticks the same direction to whip. Whereas like Supercross 1 and 2 still had the old school throw both the thumbsticks opposite directions to toss that baby. Like the old school whip style, right? And that was a bit of a vibe there that changed in Supercross 3. But yeah, there's certainly something to the feeling and the physics of Supercross 3. It's almost like when you look back at MXGP 3, there's just something there to the physics that just feel good. And I'm not saying good like Reflex good or like MX Bikes good or anything like that, okay? Don't get your panties in a wad, hardcore big dogs. What I mean by that is like for one of these Monster Energy official Supercross games, when you compare it to some of the other ones, you know, it just has like a weird, good feeling that you can't quite put your finger on why it is, you know? And I remember making that video back in the day telling you boys you should buy Supercross 3 or you need to buy Supercross 3. I remember making that video. So it's interesting now that we are looking back at Supercross 3 like it's one of the better official Monster Energy Supercross games. Well, one of the first big things when you're comparing 3 and 5, or 3 to 4 or 5, is the content. Supercross 3, without a doubt, has the best content of any other Supercross game that we've had so far. Official Monster Energy Supercross games, right? There's like 7 of these outdoor test track training tracks on the freeride compound of Supercross 3, right? I feel like this was the first one where we really got this many different Supercross tracks like this. Extra Supercross content, you know what I mean? It's not just the standard 16 rounds of official replica tracks, right? And just the whole vibe of these tracks really played into that feeling like you're in an official Supercross game and you're riding on these, you know, the style of them I feel like is a lot more replayable than like the style of the Supercross tracks on the compound of Supercross 4 or 5. Not only was there less of those, there's only like 4 of those in each of those games, whereas in this game there's like 6 or 7 of these, and they're just better tracks. They're not as simplistic and basic and boring arena cross futures amateur bullshit style of compound Supercross tracks like you got on 4 and 5. So I think there's just a lot more replayability there. And on top of all that, just take a little gander at the dirt. That's the first problem here on Supercross 5. One of the most bug-ridden, if not the most bug-ridden milestone game I swear it feels like that I've ever played. I remember saying that more than once in the past, but bro, I'm telling you. And this is with default high graphical settings on PC more than a month after the game has come out, and the dirt still looks like this. Still. I do not have any special settings set to a certain thing to make it look goofy as shit. I've got default NVIDIA graphical settings and the default high settings in the game. So, yeah, that one's on milestone. Still have the unfixed graphical bugs in the game. They have all kinds of bugs with the paid DLC. You know, we got bugs here in Supercross 5. So, that's pretty disappointing. Certainly don't remember Supercross 3 having quite that many bugs, but again, it depends on what you play it on. You know, if you play it on a console, you may have a totally different experience with it. But let's get into what everybody really came to this video for, okay? Which one of these games feels better? You know, which one of them do I think has the better physics feel, or the whatever, the one I think's worth more of your money, or whatever the hell, you know what I'm saying? I feel like that's kind of the point of this video here. So certainly Supercross 3 wins in content, because you got to remember, back in Supercross 3, that was also back when they weren't doing any of the residency shit. So you still had all of your full selection of different stadiums that you went to with the normal default replica content from Milestone in the game. Plus you had all those outdoor compound training tracks like I told you boys about previously. So whereas when you got to Supercross 4 and 5, that's when they started doing the residencies. That's when they started to combine the tracks into the same stadiums. And you just don't get quite as much of that variation to the track content in 4 and 5 as you did in 3. So without a doubt about it, 3 wins in content, and I think the free ride track itself is just better in 3 than it is in 4 or 5. So content, it's pretty much a blowout, right? But when you get to the physics, this is where it gets a little tricky. This is where it gets a little interesting. So I know everybody's got their own little personal Supercross game that they're the most attached to, or they think has the best feeling to it, but everybody's got varying levels of, you know, the amount that they play these games, how hardcore they are in these games, your other kind of dirt bike games experience. You know, I think some people are a little bit limited with what all different dirt bike games they've really played. You know, really put those hours into Reflex, really put those hours into Sim, played MX bikes, Unleashed, Untamed, put all those hours into all those older dirt bike games, plus all the new ones, never missed one of them, right? So, you know, if you're one of those kind of people, you do certainly get a bit of a next level of experience in sort of how these physics systems have worked and what makes them good and what doesn't, things of that nature. What I will say about Supercross 5 is it certainly is more of a looser feeling than you had in 3. As you can see here, the graphical difference, it's almost uncomparable. You see how there is some bugs to the graphics on some of the tracks in Supercross 5? Are you like starting to realize that's a real thing now? I know a lot of you boys play on console, and I don't think you're having the same experience as the PC guys. But Quad Daddy. So that's right off the bat, like, graphically, there's more bugs and just weird shit to the graphics of Supercross 5 than there was in 3. 3 feels more like a completed graphical system, and I know there's some people that still think 3 just had superior graphics, like, period, anyways, compared to 4 or 5, and I can see where you're coming from on that. It's got a bit of a darker, grungier kind of look to it. It's not as, like the 4, I think 4 got more brightness on the graphics. It kind of, like, tried to like brighten everything up a little bit, you know what I mean? Almost like gamma correction type shit going on. I don't really know, but 3 definitely has more of that grittier, darker, just, and some people perceive that as looking more realistic, you know what I mean? and I can see where you're coming from on that. I think some elements of the graphics of like 4 make it look, you know, a little bit better, but there's certainly better things about 3's graphics too, you know? And then once you get to 5, they've just fucked it all up with the graphics of it. Really, they just have. So that's one thing right there. Got to give some cool points to Supercross 3 for still having a Galaxy jersey. You know, the Space Boy. This was still back when they had the Galaxy jersey. I think this was was this the Thor one? I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And the Space Boy butt patch, right? Supercross 5 I don't think has any Galaxy gear to it. Pretty sure they only had that in there for a little hot, cold minute, you know what I'm saying? So either way, but when it comes to the physics itself, there's no doubt that Supercross 5 has a looser feeling to the physics. And that's where you really have to understand what sort of game you're actually talking about. I think that's where this whole thing comes from, where some people just say, well, the physics are just better in 3 all the way around than 4 or 5. But the reality of it is 3 is a more restrictive physics system. So what it does is in a way, it's almost like 3 doesn't even allow you to lean loose enough on the bike to get it to look any sort of weird or out of whack or whatever, right? Whereas when you get to 4 and 5, they've just loosened those physics up little by little. And then when you loosen the physics up, then the rider moves more and the bike moves more, and you got to change the animations. You got to get everything to look better when you're moving faster and quicker and more. I feel like that's just what it feels like in Supercross 5. Like you're leaning forward and backwards more and faster. You're moving around all over the bike more and faster. And I think what's happened here is Milestone's not really caught up to everything with the animations and just the overall physics of the bike with that looser, more movement to it. So even though I feel like it's a good change to make it looser, you know, they're going to have to catch up with the times, because Supercross 3 is almost getting more of a realistic look to it than like 4 or 5, because the animations and the physics and everything, they were a little more honed in, it seemed like, in 3. Obviously, it does have that weird, like you're sliding out on, like, spinning out on concrete when you slide in the corners. It does have a little bit of that weird feeling in 3, but, you know, but I do think what they've done with the leaning forward and backwards in 5 is certainly better than 3. Being able to lean more forward and backwards in an arcade dirt bike game is just better. You know, it is just better, because that opens up the door for like separating yourself more. The skill gap door opens up, all this different shit, and that's what you got to be careful of when you start looking at like the physics of Supercross 3 and you think it's just so much more realistic than 5 in every way. Like, I get the animations and shit don't look all that great in 5, graphics are fucked in 5, but like, you got to realize though what kind of game you're talking about. Do you understand what I'm saying? I feel like a big problem that happens is a lot of guys start going down this road of, well, how realistic does the bike look, right? How realistic does the bike feel? How realistic is the gameplay of it? And you have to be really careful when you talk about how realistic something is in an arcade dirt bike game. You know what I'm saying? And I think some of you that have not gotten really deep into MX Simulator, you don't really understand how an arcade dirt bike game really is meant to be, because you're wanting it to just look more and more and more realistic, right? But you got to realize that's not what Milestone's even setting out to do. They're not setting out to make a simulator or even a hybrid mix between a simulator and an arcade dirt bike game. They are just trying to make an arcade dirt bike game. And so you have to sort of look back to Reflex in the sense of there's aspects of reflexes physics that are not perfectly realistic. There's aspects of reflexes, whip physics and landing and leaning and moving that has a arcadey feel to it, which makes it to where it's not super realistic like a simulator, but it's that perfect balanced hybrid between like looks realistic and kind of has somewhat of a realistic element to it, but it also still plays like an arcade dirt bike game. You don't want these games to get to a point where they're starting to like restrict your movement to a level to where it starts like trying to make it to where you can't move the bike quite as much and you can't move around as much, which is gonna make the bike look a little more realistic, but you're gonna lose what the fuck makes an arcade dirt bike game. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I think a lot of people get caught up in that, well, it doesn't look as realistic as Supercross 3, or the bike doesn't look as realistic as it does in Supercross 3 and Supercross 5, right? I think some people get a little caught up in that, but you got to remember you're just talking about an arcade dirt bike game. And trust me, coming from a guy like me that's played all this shit, this is all I fucking have done for like the past 10 years of my life, bro. Right? Is played all these games, gotten into the simulators, played all these arcade dirt bike games, and I'm just telling you that even with reflex, it's not about it looking super fucking realistic on the bike. It's not about it looking exactly one-to-one scaling exactly realistic whips. You know what I mean? Even though reflex has a lot of a realistic look to it and a realistic sort of vibe to it, it's still not exactly realistic. It has a certain element of arcade dirt bike gaming feel to it. That's why you're able to jump massive 200-foot jumps on the free ride tracks of reflex and not pop off every single time. That's how you're able to huck and jump up over some of those massive quad and 5 jumps on the stock reflex tracks. You know what I'm saying? And if you had like the movement of Supercross 3 in reflexes track design or whatever, you couldn't even get around the tracks because there wouldn't be enough movement on the bike. You see what I'm saying? So it's like you got to give up a little bit of that super hyper realistic simulator look to everything to get a little bit of that arcadey feel to make it an actual arcade dirt bike game. Now, you can obviously go overboard with that, and then you're moving too much, or you're whipping too far, or you're doing whatever on the bike, kind of like how I would explain All Out, in a sense. You can do like 7 backflips in a row on one jump, or you can whip the bike in a way that it just doesn't even remotely resemble real-life whipping. Do you see what I'm saying? Whereas, like, reflex still keeps you somewhat in that realistic box, but without taking it to a simulator level. You see what I'm saying? This shit's deep right here, boys. You really have to have played a lot of these games to fully understand this, but that's what I'm saying when I explain these certain elements that I feel like are better to the physics of 5 than 3. I feel like there certainly are some things to it, but you don't want to get so caught up in just looking at which one looks more realistic, because you got to remember, there's more to it than that with an arcade dirt bike game. So, but that's not to say there's not some good elements to the physics of 3, because there is, or I wouldn't even be making this sort of a video comparing 5 to 3. You know what I'm saying? There is a certain element of connection to the ground on 3 that I feel like is a little bit lost in 5. It's like 4 and 5 are starting to get a little bit more of a arcadey, but in a good way. But they also, I feel like, still need to hone in the realism and the grounded gravity feeling to the game a little bit. It doesn't have a super floaty feeling to it, but at the same time, I don't think it has quite as groundedness that 3 has to it, and that certainly gives these games a different vibe when they have a groundedness feeling to it, right? Almost like if you could have a baby between Supercross 5 and 3, You would think that would create 4, but not really. Not really. You got to understand they've made improvements with things from 4 to 5, so mixing like 5 and 3 together would make a better game, if you know what I'm saying. If you could take the realistic elements of 3 and mix them with the arcade next level of movement, more like reflex movement in 5, if you could mix all that together, then you would have something that's closer to reflex, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about one versus the other, so at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of people are going to go back to 3 because, like I say, the content is such a massive deal, and it's not like 5 has all that much more to it. Track editor content-wise, certainly doesn't have anything more to it, terrain deformation-wise, or rain mode-wise, or really anything. It does have a helmet editor. That is the one little baby thing that Milestone added in 5 that you didn't have in 3. But other than that, though, there really just hasn't been a whole lot more added. You know, even in 3, I think that was the one where they first added like the sand section to the track editor, I'm pretty sure. So you still got the sand section stuff. And in 3, you like I say, you can whip with both thumbsticks the same direction. So that's the first one that introduced that. I feel like 3 does have a better pop-off system than 5. 5 that's where one element of it where it's just going way too arcadey. You don't pop off, you don't have that impact when you're landing off of a big jump as much in 5 as you do on 3. And I feel like that certainly does give 3 a more realistic feel in a certain sense, but you got to realize there's a lot more to the physics than just one aspect of it. You know what I mean? So that's a big part to it right there. But it does create a certain charm to 3 by having that sort of feeling with the graphics, with the content. You know, it just gives it a charm because everything, like I said, kind of came together at once, right? What I'm trying to say here is if you took Supercross 3's graphics and content and you put it into the gameplay of Supercross 5, I really don't even think this would be a comparison. I think 5 would just be better. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, literally sit down and think about that. I know some of you boys are real attached to the gameplay of 3, but just hear me out right here. You need to really sit down and just imagine plopping the gameplay of 5, but into the more darker, grungy, realistic graphics, all of that different stadium track content of 3, right? And maybe just took just a little bit of the physics feel of 3 and injected it into the feeling of 5, and that right there would have been the greatest official Supercross game to date, for sure. So, but at this point, me going to tell you to buy one or the other, you know what? After all that bullshit that Milestone pulled with the DLC on 5, you should buy 3 instead of 5. Fuck them.